Hi, everybody. Welcome to our week 3 review of the character projects. So this week, what we're doing is we're really actually taking a pretty big step in terms of Photoshop. And I know that I heard from some people in terms of their experience working on the classroom in a book exercise that it was the most challenging, and it definitely, I think it's the most challenging classroom in a book exercise that we do in this class. You'll find that the next two that we do for milestone 4 and milestone 5, those are the last two, are just going to be really, I think they're pretty straightforward. Pretty much everybody finds them, just really easygoing. But this one, which is, hold on, let me just grab an image of it. Let me just get in a large version. So this one right here, this is what you were working on. First of all, the classroom in a book exercise does have a lot of different steps, dealing with, I don't know, channels and things like that. And so it just takes some time. And then also just working with the hair, it's kind of finicky. Uh, I would say that there's really the most important thing that you are learning or kind of working on is the layer mask. So you added another object using a layer mask, or that was the goal. And I know some of you are still working with that, and that's okay. It's definitely one of the steps. And it's going to end up sort of looking like this, where you have a photograph with um, a layer mask on it. And like I told some of the folks in their comments in the submission area, um, the best place to learn about working on a layer mask, I think the most straightforward way is in the milestone 2 tutorial, which is, for this assignment, the tutorial that walks you through how to take your photographs and apply the layer mask on them. So if you're struggling with that step in this assignment, take a look at that and use those directions. I think they happen, a little bit ways into the tutorial, and then just follow those steps for adding your object into your exercise. People sort of approach layer masks slightly differently. I think the classroom in a book exercise is a little bit, not that clear, which is why we have these other tutorials available. So just keep that in mind, and then use that just to to practice your layer masks. And so once you get the layer mask, though, this concept, I think the rest of this class will be much more straightforward. So if you're struggling with it this week, do take the time to really just get a sort of understanding of how it works, like how to create one. Because once you get that, then it's just a matter of like fine tuning them. Okay, so that's one of the main things that we're actually doing. Well, is there anything else I want to say about this exercise? Um, everything else that I think we're doing here in this exercise is not as important. We're going to be using adjustment layers again. Those are pretty easy, and there's like a tutorial, like an actual tutorial in the learning path on how to do that. Puppet warp is something we've introduced where you tip the guy backwards. Remember that? That's a cool technique. Some of you, we may not need to use it again, but for some of you, I think your character projects can add a lot of great movement to your characters. And I wouldn't worry about it for this particular week, but later on, it's something you can play with, and maybe we'll talk more individually in the group critique. Okay, so that's it. So, but again, layer mask, top thing to learn this week. Okay, so we're going to head back into our group critique. Okay, so what you're doing here is you were taking your photographs and then assembling them into the kind of a basic structure of your character, like the broad strokes. And we've got like several more weeks. Let's see, we've got this week, and then 1, 2, 3, like 3 sort of more installments, you could say, that we're going to kind of fine tune it. So this week I'm going to really focus on making sure everybody has layer masks. We'll kind of try to talk about how, if we need to kind of tweak the design, and again, we'll be continuing to do that for the rest of it. And so this is just the first sort of draft of working on the character design. And that's mostly the most important thing. You were also going to be adding the name of the character, just like right here, Terrible Toys Todd, whatever your character is, any text you want, you just kind of put it in a placeholder somewhere in your design. Doesn't have to be designed at all. You just take the type tool, maybe we'll do that on somebody's. You just take the type tool and type the name for your character, use the name from week 1, you know, that Eclipse Entertainment gave you, whichever one you chose, and just pop it in there. And then next week, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing maybe a little bit more you know, creative stuff with the text. But for now, that's all you need. All right, well, let's get going. Okay, let me just adjust my Photoshop here. It's always good to be able to see the layers panel clearly in what we're doing. So, okay, Madison, so looking at, looking at your layers panel, it looks like you've got your layer mask, which is awesome. Oops, why did that happen? I'm trying to right click. On the Mac, it doesn't right click as easily on the PC. Okay, great. So that's exactly what you wanted to have here, is you wanted to be able to see your background when you disabled. And I'm right clicking. You can right click on your, you know, keyboard or your laptop, and that will disable the layer mask, and then you can see it. And so that's exactly what we want to have. So you've got all of your layer masks here, which is great. And I think your character is really coming along. I love this. I think the pear body is looking really good. The head, I think, is really cute. And, you know, the kind of creative way that you sort of worked with these arms and then legs. One thing that with the layer mask, now since a lot of people use objects that have a white background, which is good because it's actually a good thing to do if you like a blank background behind your object, because it's easier to select. But sometimes what we want to do then is see, it's hard to see the selection if you have a white background. So an easy way to kind of see where you're at is to just grab, you can actually create a new layer if you want to do this. And take the rectangle tool, and any dark color, I usually just go with black or dark gray or something like that. And then right on that layer, you can kind of just sort of take and draw a little square behind there. Again, you can just sort of see the selections a lot easier. And yeah, these all look really pretty good. Sometimes you'll notice when you do this, you'll see little bits that have been left behind that you may need to correct. One thing that's really, you know, this week we're doing just like white backgrounds basically. But next week, when you add another background, you may notice things appearing. And I don't think you're going to have any problem here because I don't see anything selected. But if you did have any little like bits left over, when you change the background, suddenly you can see them, you know. But then sometimes you don't. Like you can have like selections that are kind of rough, and depending upon the background you've chosen, they might just blend right in. And Photoshop is really, we're always working with pixels, which are not perfect. Like they're not like precise things. So you're always trying to just get the sense of kind of like a somewhat, you know, as realistic as you can. And, you know, a lot of times, depending upon what you do, you know, it's just about getting it to look natural, not necessarily about perfectly cleaning every pixel up. So keep that in mind. The only thing here is, I think around the cherries, there's a little bit of roughness. Sometimes, you know, Photoshop works with some images better than other images. So I just right click. This is my fast way of getting to a layer. And it's really good if you've named your layers, because then you can really find them easily. But if you right click, you'll actually see below wherever you clicked, you'll see the layers happening. So I see cherry, 5, and 0. I think I did the 5, and then the 0 is the background. So you can just go in here instead of going through on your layers panel here and kind of trying to find, especially when you get a lot of layers, that can be such a pain. You can just do it this way, and then you can see it goes to your layer right there. And then what we can do here is we can just disable this layer mask and see, hey, why? Let's investigate. Why do we have this kind of weird sort of rough surface? around the edge, and the reason why is because there's water droplets around it. And so you did a great selection. It's just that these water droplets, once you remove the background, kind of look like we can sort of see a lot of highlights on there. You know what I mean? Like the light shining on that water. So you could leave that for now and see how it, works next week when you add a background. I might probably recommend doing that. And then if you put a background behind it and suddenly that little sort of rough edge, the kind of white edge disappears, then you're golden. But if it doesn't, then, finding another cherry, a good looking cherry, should be really easy. So just, keep that in mind. Okay, moving on to your design of your character, I think it's looking really good. I don't know about this little guy here. It feels like, do we need that? Do we know what it is? Like, let's see here, hold on. And I apologize, I'm right-clicking on my laptops are just not as good as mice when it comes to designing. And for some reason, I can't click on that layer. Let's see if we can find it in here. There it is. There it is. I could see just popping that off, Okay, so I think you're good to go, really, except just adding your name. That's really, we'll of course, we'll talk more once we add the background, and we'll keep working on it. But at this stage, I think you're at a good stage. It looks to me like a character. That's the other thing that we're going to sort of really focus on this week is making something look like a character, looks like it can live and operate in the world, however it does that in whatever fashion. It can move and kind of function as a living being, which is what it is. Then the thing I'm just looking here. This little edge here is something, can you see it's kind of a little bit rough here? And that's kind of like, again, you did a good selection. It's just because of the nature of this area here. Can you see how it gets kind of black on black, right? This right at the edge of the bottom of the pumpkin, it gets very dark and then the background's dark. So Photoshop has a hard time selecting it. Oh, and then you've got this little bit there too that's kind of cutting into it. So if you can find another jack-o'-lantern that might have not have that, that's cut out like this, I bet there's lots of stuff on Google Images. That might be good, something that has a cleaner selection. You could also maybe try to fudge this by what could we do here? We could go and let's go to. There's different ways you can sort of do this, but if we go to the mask options, oh, sorry, no, that's not where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to refine mask. And I forgot that I actually am working on a different Photoshop version today. I usually, I kind of switch back and forth between computers. So this is CC, so there actually isn't a refined mask. We are now in, if you double click on your layer mask, you get into properties, which is what's replaced it. And so you can kind of go in here and it's actually the same, pretty much the same thing. You can try to smooth that edge. Sometimes that works. So you can kind of just sort of move that thing, that bar, and see what's happening to that edge. Oh no, it's not really doing very much. We could also try feathering. Feathering is one of those things that I always find the most challenging because, let's go back here, because when something is too feathered, it looks very obvious. I'm not really keen on that either. So, okay, so the other thing that I think you could do is click directly on the layer mask right here. And when you click directly on a layer mask, so this is something that is useful for everybody, and we'll probably explore it more as we go through this group critique. If you click on the layer mask right here, what we do is whenever we do something now on this image, it's actually going to be on the layer mask itself because we are no longer on the photograph, we're on the layer mask. And so what happens too is that in the color picker, instead of colors, we now turn to black and white because what we're going to be doing here is painting directly on the layer mask. So what we can do is we can let's see here. We can grab our paintbrush, which is the tool that you want to use when you're in layer masks. And with the, so to demonstrate, so right now we've got black in the color picker. That's the color that we're going to be working with. Now, if you look at the layer mask, on the layer mask, black is the color you can see right around your pumpkin head. So what's happening here is black is hiding and white is revealing. Okay, so if we paint with black on, and we're on the pumpkin layer right now, okay, so if we paint with black like so, what we're actually doing is hiding more of the pumpkin. Okay, so if we paint alternately with white, so here's the white, can you see now we revealed the background? So I use this actually technique, I always use manual stuff when I'm working because sometimes Photoshop doesn't make great selections. So what we can do here is we can actually paint with, I'm going to paint with black. So we're going to actually paint a little bit of the mask. But instead of doing that, what I'm actually going to do is you can actually change the opacity. And I'm going to change the opacity to maybe like, well, I'm going to go really low at this point, like 10%. And I'm going to use the bracket tool. I'm going to make this a little smaller. You can also go up here to make it smaller. But I'm just going to use that. I'm just going to maybe run over this edge a little bit and see if I can soften it. I didn't like that. So I'm going to try to do it like closer to this edge. So I'm kind of sort of like actually, in a way, what I'm doing is I am putting back a little of the mask, but in very tiny increments. So it's like I'm almost painting with gray. And sometimes that works, so you can kind of soften an edge, and it's not, yeah, I don't really like what's happening there. So, okay, well, so I might experiment with that head and see if you can find some other heads where you can get a nice clean selection down here. Again, sometimes, you know, a rough edge like that can be hidden and it doesn't matter. But in your case, you know, it's against this sort of really beautiful pear, and we are noticing it a little bit more. Okay, all right, but I think overall you're going in a really good direction, so just keep going. Garbage dump Dan, you need help on how to adjust the broom and the fly swatter inside of the monitor and the newspaper. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. Okay, but let's get started. Let's just start looking at the layer mask, which to me it looks like you did the layer masks, which is great. Exactly what you wanted to do here is, you know, have all of your layer masks showing. Perfect. Let's actually just do that same thing that we did with the previous design, and what we'll do is we'll just take the rectangle tool and just do that. Look, great. That looks really great. I only see maybe maybe a very small little bit around here that you could clean up. I think there's maybe a little bit. Overall, I think it's looking really good. Maybe a little bit with the toaster looks a little bit kind of like maybe you could work on that a little bit. Is this the toaster? Let's see what that background looks like. Yeah, so I think with that toaster, probably what made it hard to select is that the background is very close in color to the toaster, and so that makes these little edges harder. Okay, so what you could do, you could try two things. One, you could go and double click on the layer mask and just get this out of the way a little bit. So you could, so there's two different things, like when your edge is like this, where you want to kind of, you can start by sort of saying, hey, Photoshop, can you help me try to find this edge? And that's what you're doing in this little area here. And so the first thing you can do is go right under this edge detection tool right here, and you can kind of play with that and move it to the right and see if it can help you find that edge. And it's actually not. Can you see that? It's actually not doing a very good job here. It's actually just sort of making it in a way worse. So we can leave that. The other thing you can do is go right up here in the left. The tool, not the top tool, but the tool down is called the Refine Edge tool. And what you can do is you can actually use the bracket keys again on your keyboard to make it bigger or smaller. I'm going to make it a tiny bit bigger just to make it faster. But you can take and just run it over the edge and see. It sort of straightened it a little bit. It actually then overcompensated and kind of took a little of the background out where we don't want it to take out, and it's doing that again here. So it's, yeah, and it does do that. Sometimes it's wonderful, it does an amazing job, and sometimes it doesn't. So let's go back into your image and see. Yeah, so I might play around with a different toaster photograph for this one. Like, try to see if you can find another toaster, maybe has more contrast in the background. The higher resolution it is, the better, and see if you can get a cleaner selection. That's, in this case, that's what I would do. I always give it my best shot to make a selection, and if the photograph doesn't cooperate, then I just move on. You know, I don't waste my time trying to fix it. It looks like maybe this is as well, maybe could have been, we can do the same thing with this guy and see. Here's layer 5. So first thing is just to take a look at the image. And let's just zoom in a little bit. Looks like a good image. Again, what we can do is do the same thing. We can open it up. Can start with the radius tool and see if that will, so that's actually maybe doing a little bit better job here. See, it's starting to get a little white around the edges. It does do that. Let's click the Smart Radius tool. Sometimes that can help a little bit. Let's see. So we got a little bit, but it still hasn't done anything. There's a little problem here too. So let's go over to our edge detection tool and kind of just, oops, I don't know. Oh, I just want to hit that area. Oh, that looks good. So that might, let's see. Sort of working a little bit there. That's a little bit better. And you don't want to do it too many times, otherwise it starts deleting too much of the background. So it's kind of, maybe that's good enough at this point. You know, we can also go in here and clean up this edge manually, this little bit of white here, zoom in. We'll do the technique of painting directly on the layer mask by clicking on that layer mask. We're going to grab our paintbrush tool, make sure it's black, turn this down a little bit, and I'm going to increase the opacity a little bit so we get more masking. We don't want it too transparent, and then we can go through here and you see I can sort of clean this up. So you can pass over this. I don't have the opacity on 100%, so that makes it actually makes cleaning it up a little easier. So you can try that and kind of clean it up. Be nice too if we could also get, you see it's got these little holes in here. It'd be nice if we could cut those out too. So we could, let's go back in here with our edge detection refine edge tool, and maybe we can we do that? Click on these guys. Sort of cut, can you see it's sort of trying to, yeah, it's kind of cutting it out, so you could go over these and try to cut them out, because then when whatever we put behind it, that way it's going to show through naturally. So you could do that. That actually I think might work. It's still a little bit gray, you know, it's not quite black, so it hasn't quite got, but I think that's probably going to work better. It's a, you know, this is a complicated object, but I think you probably could save it. Okay, let's move on then and talk a little bit about your character design. Overall, I think it looks pretty good. I like the idea of the newspaper with the fly swatter kind of stuck in it, and I like the you know, the wheel. This is a body. I do like the toaster as the head. I think that's cute, you know. You know, what I might say is, you know, symmetry is something that whenever we put together living bodies, like from imagination, and of course based on real life, symmetry is something that living creatures tend to have, you know, if you go out in nature. And what by symmetry, I mean like the arms are the same, the legs are roughly the same. You know, there's a kind of a sense of symmetry. So as fun as it is to make things different, it actually is better from a kind of a character design point of view to make, like in this case, the arms the same. And so you can choose which one you like. Like, would you want to have the brooms as arms or the newspaper and the fly swatter connection, which could be cute too. So you can kind of think about that, maybe play with that and decide which one you want. In terms of how do you make them appear to blend, it can be tricky whenever you can hide something behind something else, like the newspaper behind the body. Of course, here it feels like it connects. Here, it's a little harder, but you could probably, at this point, just leave it as is if you wanted to use the broom, or just kind of see how that works. A lot of times just having a round top can work. And then of course, you know, whatever, if you decide to use two brooms, then of course that side will hide behind there. I think it'll probably look okay. Okay, and then you need your name. And I think those are the main things at this point. You know, there's always going to be more that we can add next week, but for this week, I think if you work on those areas, I think you'll be in good shape. Amanda, okay, and it looks to me like you've got layer mask here, which is great. These legs look really intriguing. Yeah, I think your legs look really good, don't they? They look very three-dimensional. They've got a lot of kind of roundness and dimension, which is so great. Yeah, overall, I think your character design looks good too. And also your selections, like you have a background here, which is great. So we're able to kind of look at the different, you know, areas of selections and see that it looks, you know, pretty clean, which is great. I don't see anything that's sort of standing out, any little bits and edges, so that's really terrific. You know, and of course, if there were, that would be fine too. The wonderful thing about having layer masks is when you are working on a layer mask and you do have little edges, it's something you can fix, you know, like, because if you delete the background first, which is what I used to do back in the early days of Photoshop. I don't even know if we had layer masks at that point. You know, I started Photoshop. Well, anyhow, we had a very, it was a very different program. It was still great, but a very different program. So now, you know, with layer masks, it doesn't really matter, you know, what you do with your selection, because, you know, you can always fix it. So yeah, I think that, yeah, it's looking pretty good. There's a tiny bit of, maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit here that you could clean up using the paintbrush technique that we did. So you could just, you know, go on top of it, grab your paintbrush up here like we did before, using black in here. If you need to change it, you just use the little arrows, and then you zoom in and you can just paint any little bits away. But I think that's the only thing I can really see. So in terms of your character design, I would probably say the same thing that I just said previously, which is that I think that the symmetry of the legs is really looking good. I might go with symmetry of the arms as well. You know, so make two green arms. And maybe if you want to, you know, if you're interested in making you know, having objects with, you know, within it, maybe it would hold something in its hand, you know, to one of the hands could have something that relates to your character design. So I would probably, again, the green arm to me seems like the most logical one. Let's see, is this here? Yeah, so you might, yeah, you might just try putting that green, like, you know, duplicating it and putting it over here, the green arm. Okay, I really think that's probably the main thing. You know, I kind of like the way you've designed it so it's like exploding out of the background. So maybe keep it that way now, depending upon the background. Maybe, you know, it would get a little smaller later, like it would fit into the frame. But for now, I don't know. It's always better to make Terrible Twi's, or your character, I should say, really fill the frame rather than you know, having it too small, because you always want to be able to see your work. And if you're going to make it sort of fill the frame, it's good to kind of do what you did, which is to overlap it, to kind of crop it outside of the frame. Okay, so you can leave this background here now too, the color background. Next week we're going to replace it with some kind of photograph. So so you'll have a chance to experiment with that as well. But that's next week, so nothing to worry about now. Okay, Amanda. Okay, yeah, layer masks, they look like they're in place. Great. Let me just do that same trick that I did before, just to kind of look at the what's happening with the layer masks. And as I said before, this is something that, you know, so your pumpkin looks great. This is the cinnamon stick. I think that looks really good too. I think it's probably just the bag, which is probably got a lot of kind of little tendrils coming out of it, doesn't it? Yeah, kind of, yeah, sort of has a little bit of stuff happening. You could probably take your layer mask. Let's just take your layer mask in here, and you can actually run right over all of these objects. You don't, doesn't matter. It understands we're in this layer mask, and you could maybe do. Let's see, how's that doing there? So yeah, didn't like that either. It's not. We're not doing. Our refine edge tool is not operating that well today. So we could also try this and see if it kind of cleans up that edge. And it actually is doing a little bit. It's getting a little bit of a halo. It's always a matter of how far do you push something. You kind of always want to do just the smallest amount that does it. So let's see if we can smooth. Let's try smoothing it. Sometimes that works too. I always start usually from the top to the bottom. So yeah, I don't know. You could probably leave it at this point, or you know, and see how your background goes, or you could go in and you can kind of clean it up using the paintbrush technique, just kind of smooth over those edges. You know, clicking by paintbrush technique, you know, where you click on the layer mask, what we just did before, and use your paintbrush tool to maybe, you know, kind of clean this edge a little bit. It's always better to really zoom in here, so I'm like doing a terrible job, but you could do that. It's not really yeah, anyhow, so I think that's really, in terms of the layer mask, I think that's the only thing here that really looks like it needs some help. And in terms of your, and it's not very much, and then in terms of your design, I think overall it's starting to really look like a character. I love the pumpkin head and the cinnamon sticks arms. I like the kind of rough bag. And I love these lemon slices. They're really great. I wonder though if they really are working here in this particular place to kind of, they feel like in a way they're covering, like, ooh, that's such a great, like this little kind of way, this curve actually wraps right around the pumpkin head. That looks really good. It's really hard to actually get something like that to happen, you know, to fit something like a round against a round like that. So I wouldn't cover that. I think you need to like show that off. I love the cinnamon sticks arms and the legs. I'm wondering with these lemon slices, I don't know if you could put them somewhere else in the design. I mean, you don't have to use everything you've used. I mean, maybe they could be feet. Or the ends of your arms. No, I kind of do like the ends of the cinnamon sticks. They look really nice, just the way they are. But so you could think about that. Maybe they could go somewhere else, maybe not. I think that's just, you know, the nature of most design I find is that you always have more things and ideas when you start. And as you work, you sort of slowly kind of whittle them down a little bit. And that's just the process of design, I find. Okay, the legs. Yeah, the legs. You know, you had a grass here, which I love the idea of having like these blades of green, but I think that maybe grass is a hard thing to select because it doesn't feel like it has enough visual weight and clarity. Like compared, if we compare it to the cinnamon sticks here. So something you may try is seeing if there's something else that would operate like a green blade of something. Like, something probably that's larger, like a plant maybe that has like a really long leaf. Or I was thinking of, I have a lot of irises in my yard. I seem to have inherited them, and they have these kind of blades. I like the leaves are like kind of very sort of they're large and kind of green. If you just look up iris and you'll see what I'm talking about. And so like, and they just seem like they'd have more like visual weight. But there's probably a lot of other green kinds of things that you could kind of think about, like something that's, again, just kind of think of something that's bigger and will be easier to select than will look like a leg. Okay, I think that's the main thing about your design. Don't forget to put your name somewhere. Um, you could kind of put it here if you want, like just kind of pop it in here on the side. Or, you could make everything a tiny bit smaller and put it at the top or the bottom, find a little place for it. Okay, I think that's it. Our Garden Glitter Grace. Um, yeah, I think it's very natural to have to look for more photographs. Just sort of, it's good. It's a good sign that you're really evaluating your photographs and really trying to, find the best possible fit. So I already checked your layer masks. I put the background behind. They look good. You've got everything in place. Oops. So that's great. That's again like the really the biggest hurdle here in I think in this particular week is to just master, or even not master, just kind of get a working knowledge of how to do a layer mask. It takes time. When I started layer masks, it wasn't the easiest thing to kind of wrap my brain around. And then once I'd done it, once or twice, I did it a few more times and it started to make sense to me. So I really just think it's a matter of really practicing and playing with it until you really get the sense of how it works. Okay, and I think your design looks really good. I really love like the idea of the flower skirt and what's happening here with the head, the twig arms, the leaf little feet. That's so cute. One thing I think maybe the body for some reason is I don't know if it's quite working yet. And the reason why I think is as, kind of, let me just see if I can, where is this guy? There it is. I think that, this particular image has kind of has a lot of detail in it. Like where it's like transparent, it's got this circular element, which I think is all really cool, but somehow it seems like it's becoming too busy for the character, like it's kind of taking away from the rest of the character. So I might be inclined. So now everything else seems to start working without that. Maybe something simpler, small, something that you kind of play around with that. Maybe there's something else that you could insert in there. I kind of like the idea of taking the skirt and making that more of a feature, because I think that kind of has like exaggerating elements in your design in a character can really make them kind of just become very interesting and kind of like bring them to life. So I'd be inclined to like, could even, let's see how far we can go. Oops. That's a little too, well, I don't know. Maybe that's not too big. Like the big ball gown, and maybe you would just have a little neck here, so maybe you wouldn't actually need to have like a torso. Maybe the skirt would become the body. I don't know, just something to think about. You can sort of play with that, but I would say that's the little area in there that you might want to work with. Yeah, that's probably where I'd go. The direction I'd go in is just working on that small area there. There could be other ways. I always, in critiques, I tend to try to give like practical solutions, like that. Maybe you could do this. Go in this direction. But ultimately, it's all just about problem solving, and so you may have a different way of dealing with a certain kind of area or part of your design, or something that you want to keep working on. Um, And let's see, anything else? Just put your character name. You've got a nice spot right here. You could just put that in. You know, you just grab the type tool right up here. Just click anywhere and then just type your name. Doesn't, you know, the name of your character, Garden Glitter Grace. It doesn't matter what kind of typeface you use or any, it doesn't have to have any design at this point. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, Jennifer. Yeah, so yeah, you know, Photoshop is a little overwhelming. I would, you know, in terms of all of the tutorial, we always have a lot of stuff in our classes, and sometimes it's a little much. So I would definitely use the video in the instructions for this assignment. So the M3 Task 2 instructions, that video for how to set your character up. So you want to make sure that you have each of your objects brought in to the design, and then the background is going to be hidden as opposed to deleted, right? So that's what I would work on. That's, I think, the main thing that I want you to work on is if you get that done, I think you'll be, you know, you'll be in good shape. And then you want just to put the name of your design, your character, just you can pop it down here. Again, just you can use the type tool and just type it in there. And I think that's the main thing that I would start with. And then we could maybe work a little bit more on the character. You know, if you have time, you could work on it a little bit more. I think the main thing is that somehow I think that maybe, as much as I like having all of these beautiful flowers, you know, they're really cool to have all these flowers. I think what happens is, with having so many flowers, it starts to appear a little bit like a flower, like a bunch of flowers, like a flower bouquet, as opposed to a character. So I might try, like maybe you could leave the eyes or the feet as flowers, and let's just take these guys out here. And maybe you can add something else for the feet. I would probably work on that, you know, just because I think it'll be, again, it'll be a little bit more like a character that way. And then this here, I might take, so these little green beans here, I might also just kind of take a few things out, you know, see what do you actually need to make your character work. I kind of feel like maybe you just need, let's just get rid of that. So now already that's starting to look a little bit more like a head. It's easier to understand, you know? So maybe I would do that. I might take out some of these little beans on the side, you know, that are, they seem like, again, you know, it's just about trying to find the least amount, in a way, that will make your character works, and sort of kind of pare it down. Maybe you could just have these guys here, you know, in the could add maybe another one here so that you'd have like maybe 3, you know, sort of simplify. Okay, so that's what I'd work on here. Again, start with your layer mask, maybe add the name of your character, and if you have time, play with your design a little bit more. Okay, Joshua. So this is also Garden Glitter Grace. You know, the first thing we're going to do before we look further is, what I'd recommend is just grabbing that crop tool and just cropping your character down a little bit so that you have, like, think about, you know, your character is sort of tall, you know, vertical, like it's vertical. So I think it helps to have like a vertical format, like what we call portrait. So maybe just crop it down a little bit. That way, automatically, we start to see your design a little bit more, which is awesome. Okay, so for you, I think the same thing as I just mentioned to Jennifer is that you need to have every one of your photographs selected using layer masks. So that's where I'd start with, is just going in and doing that, making sure, and then adding the name of the character. And then maybe you could also experiment a little bit with your design. I love the feet. I think those are going to be really cool in there. Somehow this little element, it feels like maybe it's like the edges, it's maybe a little busy. I'd kind of like maybe be inclined to experiment, kind of like the spike pump. That might be a possibility to you know, put that on the other side maybe as arms. So we would transform that, go up to File and, I'm sorry, Edit and transform. So we would flip it horizontal. There we go. So you could sort of maybe do that. Kind of that's pretty cute. You know, just kind of playing with what you have. So that's what I'd maybe work on a little bit more, maybe play with the head a little bit more. But again, layer masks are the real key here that you wanna have done this week. So just like I mentioned to Jennifer, use the video in the instructions for this assignment. There's a video that's like 12, I don't know, 15 minutes long or less that shows you how to bring your photographs in and then put the layer mask on them. I think it's the easiest, most kind of clear explanation we have in the entire classroom for how to do that. Anybody, if you have problems with your layer mask or any of the other technical stuff, don't hesitate to use our free tutoring service in ThinkingStorm. I know some students never use ThinkingStorm, but I also hear from a lot of students who actually go, almost every week to talk to a tutor or, kind of meet with a tutor. Because I don't think you actually talk to them so much as like maybe kind of instant message them, but you also can share your screen with them. They can like look at your file and, show you things. So any sort of specific kind of issue you have, again, it's a free service and you can just, head over there whenever you need to. And they're, I think, around almost 24 hours a day. I don't know if totally 24 hours a day, but close. Okay, everybody, I think everybody's off to a good start.